Good morning, dear ones. This is Nancy Willingham welcoming you to the Unity of Claremont Sunday lesson for July the 5th. Today we continue in our Biblical Bride series, the story of the prostitute bride. As always, we begin with the context of this Bible story so that we can understand the world in which the characters lived. Then we can explore the story and its metaphysical meaning for our lives today. Every Bible story is a tool to help you on your spiritual journey. Today's story encourages us to have a consciousness of victory. It is about the overcoming power of the soul. Tamar's story is found in the first book of the Bible, in Genesis. It is set in what the Bible scholars call the patriarchal period of Jewish history. The three patriarchs of Israel were Abraham, his son Isaac, and Isaac's sons Jacob. Jacob's fourth son was Judah, making him the great-great-grandson of Abraham. And this is the story of Judah and Tamar. During the patriarchal period, before all the wonderful stories of the 12 tribes of Israel, there was only one Jewish tribe, the tribe of Abraham. So, this story begins when Abraham's descendants were establishing themselves in the land given by God to Abraham, which usually meant intermarrying with the local Canaanites. In fact, the tribe of Abraham looked very much like all the other indigenous groups scattered around what we now think of as the Near East. Their customs and moral code were similar to that of the Canaanites, except, of course, that they worshipped the God of Abraham, not the Canaanite gods, and considered themselves under his special protection. For instance, polygamy was the norm, and all the patriarchs had several wives. Another interesting custom, which seems kind of strange to us today, was called levirate marriage. Simply put, it required that if a man's brother died childless, he was required to marry his widowed sister-in-law. Her firstborn son, then, would inherit equally with the surviving brother's own sons. In this way, the deceased brother's name and estate would be preserved. Well, Judah married a Canaanite woman by whom he had 3 sons, making them the great-great-grandsons of Abraham. He arranged for his eldest son to marry a Canaanite girl named Tamar. But shortly after the marriage, the eldest son died while the couple was still childless. So, following the Levirate custom, his second son, Onan, was required to marry Tamar. Well, here is where the story becomes suitable for mature audiences only. Onan did not want his sons to share their inheritance if Tamar bore a son by him. What was he to do? He could not refuse to marry her because that was required by the law of the time. Nor could he refuse to consummate the marriage because that would also violate the law. So he devised another solution, a cruel solution: birth control. He practiced withdrawal when he was with Tamar, the only form of birth control available in the Iron Age. He enjoyed connubial bliss with his new levirate wife, but denied her the one thing that was the most important thing to every woman of her time. He denied her the possibility of motherhood. This act was so abhorrent that the God of Abraham, boom, struck him dead. As a Catholic, I was taught that this story is proof that God abhors birth control. I don't know what a Catholic theologian would say about this story today, but as you can see from the plain reading of the story, Onan's sin was not his practice of birth control, but his failure to fulfill his obligation under levirate law. His sin was actually against his deceased brother. But remember, Judah had a third son. His name was Shelah. When Onan mysteriously died, the third son, Shelah, was too young to get married. So Tamar was sent back to her parents' house to wait for Shelah to grow up. At this point, it's understandable that Judah's family were unsure what to think about Tamar. Why was she childless after two marriages? Was she barren? Why was she widowed twice in rapid succession? Was she a witch? Or maybe even a murderer? So, fears, rumors, and speculations grew while she was away from Judah's family, waiting for Judah to send for her to marry Shelah. So, he just didn't send for her. Shelah grew to manhood, and Judah did nothing. Naturally, he didn't want to lose another son. We don't know if he ever intended to send for her or if he was just procrastinating until he could figure out what to do. Meanwhile, when the time for her marriage came and went, Tamar figured out that she had basically been left standing at the altar, so to speak. The typical plight of a girl in this position would be simply to live out her life as a spinster in her father's house. She could not marry anyone else because she was promised to Shelah. As a childless daughter, she would have the lowest status, a liability to her family, little more than a household servant, for the rest of her meaningless life. But Tamar was not your typical subservient female. True to her name, which means victory through uprightness, standing tall, she took matters into her own hands. Hearing that Judah would be taking his sheep for shearing in a neighboring town, she put away her widow's dress and donned the garb of a prostitute. She then went to the area outside the city gates where prostitutes line the road, waiting for customers who have fat purses full of money from the wool they just sold at the sheep shearing. The custom of the time was for prostitutes to veil their faces, which might explain why Judah did not recognize her. But she recognized him as he traveled to the sheep shearing, and she seduced him. Of course, the terms of the arrangement had to be set. He had no money with him, but promised to pay her with a kid on his way home from the shearing. She agreed, but perhaps because of her prior experience with him, she required collateral. She asked for his ring, the cord it was on, and his staff. He agreed. He gave her his ring, the cord, and the staff, and the transaction was completed. These ancient rings, here I'm showing you one here, were actually like cylinders. They were used to seal documents, usually worn on a cord around the neck. True to his word, he looked for her upon his return trip home, but no prostitute. He inquired, "Where is the prostitute who works in this area?" No one knew her. It was a mystery he could not solve, so he went home without his ring, cord, and staff. Some months later, he learned that Tamar was with child. This was an outrage, and coincidentally, it solved his dilemma. According to the custom of the time, she had become an adulteress. As the patriarch of his family, he judged her and passed sentence. She was to be burned at the stake. He proceeded to Tamar's father's house and demanded that she be brought out to be burned alive. Her family complied. After all, her death would solve two problems for them. First, they would be rid of an unwanted liability, a spinster to be supported, and second, they could save face to some extent by publicly showing that they washed their hands of this scandalous, adulterous daughter. Without any support from her family or her in-laws, she was totally alone, abandoned, and condemned to a horrible death. But she did not give up. As she was being dragged to the stake, she produced Judah's ring, cord, and staff, declaring, "The owner of these things is the father of the baby." Upon seeing his ring and staff, Judah quickly put two and two together. He could, of course, keep his episode with her a secret and just proceed with the execution, but instead he did the honorable thing. He rescinded her sentence and declared before all to hear, "She is more in the right than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." Tamar was taken to Judah's household, where she gave birth to twin boys. Both both would be the great great grandsons of Abraham. One of them, Perez, became the father of one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Tamar, the Canaanite prostitute bride, would go down in history as an ancestor of King David, and through his line of Jesus of Nazareth. In his book, Mysteries of Genesis, Charles Fillmore writes that since the name Tamar means palm tree, erect and upright, victory or conquest, metaphysically, she represents victory and conquest through uprightness. This consciousness of victory and conquest and overcoming power is in the soul of the individual. Both the divine masculine and the divine feminine reside in every person. Tamar represents the feminine aspect of the life force within each of us. She was determined to have a meaningful life, not merely exist, and she was determined to do so in the right way. Of course, when it comes to major life challenges, we are all tempted to fall back into sense consciousness, forgetting our spiritual powers. The spiritual manifestation of our desires may be fine for finding the right and perfect parking space, but what if you lose your job, or your doctor gives you a scary diagnosis, or your marriage is falling apart? Part of us wants to get practical, use common sense to, as Roseanne Barr says, get real. Tamar represents that in your consciousness which is determined to overcome, to be victorious, and to do so in a way that is upright, in line with your spiritual connection to the divine, true to your Christ self, which is your true self. In the final analysis, all Tamar had was her determination to be victorious over her challenges, and to do so in harmony with uprightness, as she understood it. She was determined to have a meaningful life and to give life through motherhood. And she was specific. She wanted her sons, and she wanted it to be done right in the right way. And that was enough. Today, the world is dealing with a major challenge in the COVID-19 virus. It threatens not only life, but the financial well-being of both countries and individuals. In the United States, we're also experiencing violent racial conflicts. Both of these challenges spill over into our individual lives in different ways and in varying degrees. On top of that, even in the best of times, to paraphrase Forrest Gump, stuff happens. So, most of the members of our church family are stressed to one degree or another. Many of you have shared with me your fears and, yes, even your anger. But we know that we can face every challenge and be victorious. We know that greater is He that is within me than he that is in the world. So this is my suggestion. Like Tamar, envision exactly how you want your challenges to be dissolved and your heart's desire to manifest. Right now, I invite you to close your eyes and envision what you want your life to look like 5 years from now, in July of 2025. Take a moment to paint a vivid picture with complete details. How will your life look and feel? Where will you be? And with whom? This exercise does not involve solutions, how your challenges will be resolved. When we make the mistake of thinking about the how, we are drawn back into the negativity of our fears, into the what ifs of possible catastrophes, and that can totally overcome all of your other positive thoughts. In fact, isn't that exactly what our minds do when we are not determined to set them straight, to force them into the upright position? We rise above the details to utilize the divine, the power within that is our inheritance as the children of God, when we focus on the good. We know that it is our Father's good pleasure to give us the kingdom, to pour forth all the wisdom, love, and life that we can hold, poured into our laps, pressed down, and shaken together. Once you have a clear picture of your life in 2025, write it down and read it every morning and every night. Your goal is to know that this is the result, to know that the practical, common sense actions you take today will bear fruit, that you will succeed and have this meaningful life that you are envisioning. Finally, just as Tamar had no idea and certainly never dreamed that she would become an ancestor of great men who changed the course of history, so we have no idea how much good we do when we operate on a spiritual level. Simply to conduct our lives with integrity, operating out of Christ consciousness instead of sense consciousness, has a ripple effect that blesses the world both today and tomorrow. In closing, I share with you Charles Fillmore's favorite Bible verse, put into affirmative form. I think it captures the spirit of tomorrow. So please join me in affirming, Christ in me, my hope of glory. Amen. So be it. And so it is. So this is Nancy Willingham, hoping that your 4th of July weekend is filled with love and fun, and wishing you a wonderful week full of blessings and miracles.